It's good to have you stay with us. So we're taking a look at this special broadcast, bringing you all the updates concerning Lesotho as it celebrates a very, very interesting year. So far, so good. It's been indeed a wonderful first half, and now we are in the second half, where we're going to take a look at the economy and the governance of this wonderful and beautiful country, no doubt. A country that my co-host, Blessings, is
definitely like to visit, of
and
course.
You're inviting to go to.
I mean, I can't wait to visit Lesotho. I've heard so many amazing things about the country, and I really, think that I will be able to get a diamond or two because the country is rich in diamonds. Anyway, we'll talk more about that as we will be discussing the economy.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, so right about now we have a package that we will be displaying for you to give an overview of the economy of the country, Lesotho, which is also known as the Mountain Kingdom. So we will be right back to discuss it right after the package.
The Kingdom of Lesotho used to be called Basutoland, but this changed when the country won independence from the United Kingdom in 1966. It is a small, mountainous, landlocked country, completely surrounded by South Africa, its much larger neighbor in both economy, landmass, and population. According to the World Bank, the size of Lesotho's economy was $2.5 billion in 2021. With a population of 2.2 million people, the country's GDP per capita is about $1,091 per person. Lesotho's economy derives its strength from agriculture, livestock farming, manufacturing, and mining. The kingdom relies heavily on remittances of its citizens who work in foreign countries and receipts from the Southern African Customs Union, which has Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Eswatini as fellow members. Its membership of this union allows for free trade between member countries. In addition to this, Lesotho is one of the members of the Rand Monetary Area. It's a common currency and exchange control area that uses the South African Rand as a common currency. Other members of this group are Namibia, Eswatini, and South Africa. Lesotho does have its own currency though. It's called the Lottie. 100 Licentes make one Lottie, which has the same value as one South African Rand. The Kingdom of Lesotho has two main natural resources, water and diamonds. The country's key sectors are services, which make up 52% of the country's GDP, industry, which makes up about 30%, manufacturing, which makes up about 16%, and agriculture, which makes up about 6%. Lesotho is also one of the biggest beneficiaries of the United States Africa Growth and Opportunity Act on the continent. It has become one of the largest exporters of garments to the US from sub-Saharan Africa. Popular brands like Foot Locker, Gap, JCPenney, Levi Strauss, Saks, Sears, Timberland and Walmart all source apparel from Lesotho. In recent years, the kingdom's economic performance has been a little slow. This is due, in part, to the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought with it restrictions on economic activity and contributed to weak external demand, supply chain disruptions, and exacerbated pre-existing structural competitiveness issues in Lesotho. According to the World Bank, the Kingdom of Lesotho's agricultural sector was the only one that registered positive growth in 2021. However, the country's economy is on the path to recovery. It is projected to grow by 2.1% between this year and 2024. This growth will be supported by rebounds in the mining, manufacturing and construction sectors as a result of improved external demand and improved business confidence around the world. Damilola Adeodiachi reporting for News Central TV.
No doubt, quick facts there concerning Lesotho, and of course an insight into the economy, and not forget into how business is done. So without further ado, let's cut in right away to the second hour as we take a look at our next focus, which would be, as rightly said, the economy and governance. Joining us right away, we do have from Human Rights and Access to Justice Program at the Transformation Resource Center, Advocate Mokitimi Swani. I hope I got that pronunciation right. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the second hour.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Tosani.
All right, let's go straight into it as we discuss about the economy. No doubt, in that package railed out, you did definitely see the fact that we do see where the resources and the economy is being run, especially looking at the natural resources that you indeed possess. But let me go straight to my very first question. How would you rate Lesotho's economy, especially in doing business in the past 56 years?
I think I should start where I indicate that, I'm not an expert in economics, but somehow we've had a
you are Mosotho, if I put it that way. You are Mosotho, right? An individual
yes.
from, of course. So I'm sure that most definitely you do engage in business one way or the other, in as much as you deal on the advocacy of the things or the country, most importantly. But how is it like? I'm just asking a general question. How is it like doing business in your country in the past years since you've actually been born?
Okay, I think we should start first, as your question indicates, is whether Lesotho is economically independent. As a country, we rely heavily on foreign aid and loans from other developed countries and international organizations. And I should hasten to indicate that the EU supports about 40% to our budget support. And we rely heavily on the United Nations as we do our reforms. And SADC has also invested so much in our reforms. And if I have to rate our economic independence, I would have to make reference to a recent constitutional court case, the High Court sitting as the Constitutional Court. I would give a small section of the facts of what happened. We happened to have the 10th Parliament, which failed to pass the Constitutional Amendment Bill with about 90 amendments and the amendment to the Electoral Act. So the Parliament was dissolved before it could pass those acts. And that really did not sit well with our development partners. And the EU demanded that Lesotho should make sure that the reforms pass before the holding of elections. So it was also a concern from the SADC body. So our Prime Minister had to declare a state of emergency, even though we did not have an emergency, so that the Council of State can advise the king to recall Parliament. So basically, because we are not so economically independent as a country, we had to abuse our own constitution to say that we have an emergency that we do not have. So that case went to court. It is readily available online. It's Bulueti and another versus the Prime Minister. It's a recent case, I think 2 weeks back. And those two constitutional amendments were thrown away because it was held that despite that those two amendments were popular, there was nothing special about Parliament failing to do its duty. So it goes to show that really we are not really very economically independent, because we rely so much on foreign aid and loans from international organizations. I also saw that you talked about the debt on the small video. I think our debt now rests at something like 18 billion to our GDP, which is 20 billion. So it's a worrying trend because in the past few weeks, there were indications that civil servants might not get their their salaries, but we had to have a loan simply to pay salaries. Going forward, I think our economy is not able to absorb its human capital into its sectors, and a large is employed in the informal sector in South Africa. In terms of production, we import everything from South Africa, including food. Moving forward to our private sector is underdeveloped, and the few corporations in the country are owned and run by foreigners, which leads to massive capital flight. I think the second one would be whether our reliance on remittances, if I have to go forward.
All right. You know what? We'll come back to you so you can go forward. I mean, I'm already shocked you're going straight into the economy. He
is wasting no time.
That's quite interesting, even though I thought you were going to focus on the advocacy.
Before we go forward, we would like to acknowledge the presence of Sehoai Santho, who is a governance and development consultant in Lesotho, South Africa, and the SADC region. So thank you for joining us, Sehoai.
Thank you very much.
It's our pleasure to have you. Okay, so let me just throw this question directly at Sehoai, since you're just joining. We're still talking about the economy, and I would like to bring two aspects. First of all, Lesotho as an individual country, and then secondly, their proximity to South Africa. I mean, it's always been a thing where they're kind of linked together. So looking at the economy of Lesotho and looking at the resources that the country has. Now, we know that they're rich in a diamond as well as water. Now, to what extent would you say that the country has harnessed her resources, or do we say that they still remain untapped?
Well, thank you for that. Well, firstly, to say I'm happy to be in your panel, and the overview of Lesotho's economy was quite useful that you provided. Then, on your question, at national level, historically, of course, Lesotho was integrated into the South African economy thanks to the Southern African Customs Union, which was first established in 1910 after the establishment of the Union of South Africa. And the logic of that was that ultimately Lesotho, Botswana, and Swaziland, the three High Commission territories, were going to be incorporated into South Africa. So the Southern African Customs Union was really ensuring the integration of Lesotho's economy and the preservation of the small economies as a market for South African production. Fast forward to South Africa's liberation or independence in 1994. Lesotho was still one of the major suppliers of labor, the South African mining industry, which it has been for the last 100 years. But the economy was also diversifying over time, especially with exports to the United States, thanks to the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which actually expires in its current form in 2025. And so that whole industry that developed due to Taiwanese and Chinese investors has to sort itself out because it is a non-reciprocal access to the US market. And at some point, Lesotho was the biggest exporter to the US market. It has declined from that first status. I think Ethiopia and Kenya were now ahead. I don't know whether Ethiopia is still there given its current war problems, but Lesotho is definitely second or third now. Secondly, it exports water to South Africa, a resource that is increasingly becoming very strategic because of climate change and South Africa's looming water deficit, because the industrialization of South Africa was centered around the Gauteng province, which is a very arid and dry part of South Africa, but that's where the mining industry and secondary industries around Johannesburg developed. So that economic hub of South Africa, which is about 40% of the South African economy, depends almost entirely on water resources transferred from Lesotho to South Africa. So that's an important pillar And then, of course, the agricultural sector that you mentioned, which has really been a residual sector, which has been declining in importance, except that with the decline of employment opportunities for Lesotho in South Africa, it is the go-to fallback sector, agriculture, for Lesotho citizens. In the meantime, relations with South Africa have also been changing, where while the men used to go to the mines, that has declined. And it is now educated Lesotho as well as women who are now getting into the services sector in South Africa, as well as into the high-level human resource sectors, the skills sectors. So educated Lesotho have been going to South Africa since 1994. And so you can say we have a problem of a brain drain to South Africa. And currently, relations between Lesotho and South Africa have been governed by, on the one hand, SACU, the South African Customs Union Agreement that I've indicated, which was renegotiated in 2002. And the new treaty was signed, which allows for reciprocity, but it has not been benefiting Lesotho's exports as much. But it's something that can be taken advantage of, maybe because Lesotho has been focusing on AGOA. And as the textile industry therefore diversifies, especially given the prospects for 2025, when AGOA expires, the South African economy is an important export route and regional value chain connection to Lesotho. The other framework has been what is called bilateral frameworks. The Joint Bilateral Commission of Cooperation was established between Lesotho and South Africa in 2002, 2001, 2002, at the insistence of President Thabo Mbeki, whose vision was that you can't have a poor Lesotho coexisting with a richer South Africa. And the idea was to have a mutually beneficial model that will gradually improve Lesotho's economy. So between 2002 and now, I would say that that Joint Bilateral Commission of Cooperation has not been fully taken advantage of. And in 2020, the current Prime Minister negotiated, together with President Cyril Ramaphosa, the upgrading of the Joint Bilateral Commission of Cooperation to a binational commission, which means that it's now cooperation at the level of heads of state. And we assume, therefore, that in the post-election period, the two countries will try as much as possible to maximize and harness the available opportunities from this new upgraded binational commission. It should have been launched in June this year, in 2022, but it was postponed because, as my colleague from TRC said, Lesotho was preoccupied with reforms and pushing through the reforms bill. So the two countries decided to postpone the signing of the upgraded binational commission. This will be signed as first order of business by the new incoming government in Lesotho after the 7th of October elections. So that's my story for now.
Okay.
Go ahead, just wrap up. I think you were about to wrap up. Oh, that's all? That's all? Okay, all right, Mr. Santho.
Yes. So we can then discuss the way forward, but I'll be led by your questions.
No problem. We'll come back to you there. Let's quickly go to, very quickly to Sani. Let's look at the human rights violation. Let's focus a little bit on the judiciary and, of course, justice programs that have been created for citizens in Lesotho. First off, of course, there are stories emanating, especially the EU has talked about it, about the violations of human rights and so on. What laws have been put in place, and judiciary, what has been done in order to ensure that citizens do have justice and are indeed protected?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And I really appreciate what Ndate Sehoai has been saying. I really appreciate it a lot. Coming to your question, the judiciary in the country has been, it was not very adequately funded. So cases in the court would take long and forever to be decided. But recently, I think in the past year, we saw when the judiciary recruited at least 2 judges. I think it was last year in August, and this year in March, I think May, yes, there was recruitment of further 5 other judges. However, there was still restrictive interpretation to our standing in courts. So basically, us dealing with individuals who have been affected and affected by capital projects, being the Lesotho Highlands water projects, the mining industry. It was not very easy for us to demand compensation for such families, to demand royalties for such families. But with the development of the law recently, after the case which saw the state of emergency and the recall of parliament quashed, it is quite easier for our organizations to go to court because His Lordship, the Chief Justice, recognized the public interest litigation. So it is going to be much easier for us to approach courts for any violation of human rights. And on the other hand, I think we still have torture, which is still endemic in the country, and we still do not have a legal statute. We do not have a legal instrument which basically criminalizes torture, degrading, and inhuman treatment. So we see back in 2015 when about 23 soldiers were tortured at one of the army bases in the country, and there has never been any accountability for such. We've seen some cases of violations in the police department, and there has not been any accountability for such. And the reforms, coming back to the reforms, I think they carried some weight, but there was not much as far as human rights are concerned, because they would need a referendum to be effective. So yes, the judiciary has not readily been adequately funded, if I may say. It has not been adequately funded because we've seen even the magistrate courts cases have been postponed because there was an unavailability of resources in the magistrate courts. And sometimes around May, I remember when one of the high-profile cases was to proceed in the High Court, and the Lesotho Electricity Company cut electricity from the court because the court is owing a lot of money, about 1.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. So those are some of the things that have been bedeviling our judiciary. But of recent, I think it was sometime in August when the judiciary, through the Chief Justice, launched the strategic plan and how the judiciary will be working in the next years. I think our judiciary is being very responsive to our problems as a country, and it has been asserting its independence over any overbearing from the executive and from parliament. And recently, we've seen the High Court and the Court of Appeal asserting their judicial independence. We can talk of the cases involving the state of emergency and recall of parliament, the constituency delimitation cases, the disqualification of constituency candidates recently, and we realized that, yes, our judiciary is going in the right direction.
Okay, thank you for that, Mokitimi. Now, Sehoai, I'm going to come back to you because you gave a very detailed and comprehensive overview of Lesotho's economy. And that will prompt me to ask you this question. Now, we know that Lesotho is known as a low middle income country. And for the past 2 decades, we have seen a decline in the economic status. And, you know, it's safe to say that the COVID-19 further exacerbated the situation. And now we do not know what the structure of the economy in the country looks like. I mean, looking at the fact that the debt profile is running into billions. But then at the same time, we cannot say that there is no coming out of this, because we know how rich Lesotho is. We know the values that they have and the exports they conduct with other countries. So that will lead me to ask you this. What exactly is now the way forward, looking at how much of a decline the country has experienced for years now?
Thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you very much for that. In fact, in summary, I would say Lesotho's big challenge going forward, I summarize it into triple R's: reforms, recovery, and resilience. And I'll quickly discuss them. In terms of reforms, the reforms process that my colleague from Chelsea has been referring to, among other aspects, was an economic reforms process, which was discussed extensively within the National Reforms Authority, which should also be discussed in conjunction with other processes to diversify the Lesotho economy from the current structure of excessive dependence on AGOA exports, the USA, at the time when in 2025 AGOA will be reviewed one way or the other, maximizing on the diamond mining sector. I've been a consultant for the diamond mining industry for quite some time on their corporate social responsibility program. And the diamond mining industry, although it's not a major employer, it employs less than 4,000 workers, but it's a major generator of forex, foreign exchange, as well as a major source of public finance, taxation to the fiscus. I know that the government and the IMF are keen to increase the tax yield, the amount of taxation that is extracted from the diamond mining industry. And it's been a big discussion in the last 2 months about whether overtaxing the mining industry will undermine Lesotho's competitiveness in terms of its diamond mining sector. And the diamond mining sector has complained bitterly that they're just recovering from COVID. Remember, during COVID, the major diamond export destinations where diamonds are cut and processed, India, Belgium, were closed. And so it's only now that the global diamond market is recovering. And at a time when two of the major diamond companies were temporarily closed. So at a time when the mining industry is recovering, the big issue was not to overtax it. So for now, there's compromise that the diamond mining industry should not be overtaxed. And there's a sort of a compromise. It's one of the big challenges that the incoming government will have to address to respond to the mining sector lobby in terms of the competitiveness of the mining industry. In the meantime, the mining ministry has allowed artisanal and small-scale mining now, because the kind of mining sector we have is a very capital-intensive sector of either open cast or, mostly open cast mining. But they have now allowed artisanal and small-scale mining because Lesotho has a lot of diamond-bearing pipes that, if well managed, can yield some good diamonds. The key challenge there is to make sure that the smaller diamonds that are getting into the market do not contaminate the clean diamonds, so to speak, because in terms of the Kimberley process, the big diamond mining companies always fear that illegal diamonds will somehow filter into the diamond market. And so there have to be guarantees that the ASM sector, the small scale mining sector, will be controlled not to dilute or contaminate Lesotho's diamond exports in terms of the Kimberley process. Then economic diversification in terms of the Binational Commission, as I said, there are a lot of opportunities to maximize on Lesotho-South Africa economic linkages, which have not been fully taken advantage of, as well as exports to the European Union, as well as taking advantage of the African free trade, the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which of course is still being finalized and being ratified. And then in terms of resilience, that's a big challenge because Lesotho, politically and economically, we call it a fragile state. Now, a fragile state is a state which is really in a state of vulnerability and can be negatively affected by any shocks, whether external, like COVID, like global market changes, like the closure of the diamond market, like the changing of access to the US market, so external shocks, or internal political shocks like instability and its consequences on the economy. So the big challenge for me facing the incoming government is to ensure that it drives the three pillars: reforms, recovery, and towards resilience. Reforms are a short-term measure that has to be done. As my colleague from Chelsea has said, it's expected to be done. Recovery and economic diversification must be done in the medium term. And then, of course, resilience is the big challenge going forward into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those points. Triple R, you said reform, not forgetting recovery, and of course resilience. But let me go straight to Tsuwani. Let's take a look at what took place most recently, and it should still be fresh in your mind like it is in ours. And we're talking about the fact that the protests took place in 2021, where salary wages were indeed discussed, especially amongst workers. Now, we do know that the COVID-19 pandemic has indeed affected the work rates, the workforce, and not forgetting the income that truly will help uplift the economy of the country. But let's really focus on the salary wages. What has been done by the judiciary, especially when workers turned down the 20% increase back then in the year 2021? And we do know that protest was indeed hijacked and led to violence. But what's your take, first of all? Let's see what your thoughts are on the judiciary and what they've done, especially in regards to salary wages.
Okay, thank you very much. The judiciary has not much to do with the revision of wages as far as the factory workers are concerned. So the judiciary was out because these things were dealt at a ministerial level. So the ministry and the boards involved were involved in some negotiations, and I do not really know how they ended, but the wages increase was not as was demanded by the factory workers. Yes, you did indicate that the strikes were hijacked. Yes, because I remember this because there were court cases. There were court cases in the labor court which I do not think they were fully prosecuted. And maybe some other unions did pull out of that. So I do not think they really achieved what they intended to achieve when they started. So basically the judiciary was denied any form of participation in that because those cases were not fully prosecuted. So yeah. The judiciary did not have much to say on that. So it boils down to the political will with those who are involved in at the ministerial level, and the board, which has to review salaries yearly. And given how fragile our economy is, and that Escrow has been indicating, I do not really think it would be very viable to have such massive increases in the wages of those people who are in the factory workers, if I may say. So
let me ask you, just to cut in very quickly. I mean, sorry for cutting in, but does Lesotho really believe in the judiciary as we speak? Is there any belief at all? I mean, we've seen other African countries where belief in the judiciary system is as minute as a seed of rice, even smaller. Oh, yeah. So does Lesotho believe in the judiciary, if at all?
Yeah, I think our reaction to that is it's mixed, because our judiciary, I think it's the last pillar. It has proven to be the last pillar of our democracy, as far as we can hold the government to account. Regard being heard to the recent cases that we've had, the Kanane Lobolwetsi and Duge case, which essentially said that the manner in which the state of emergency was declared was constitutionally flawed, so that the recall was unconstitutional. It really shows that our judiciary is willing to stand with the people against the other branches of government, the other core branches of government. So at that level, I think our judiciary has shown that it is very resilient to any interference. However, I must indicate that there were episodes in our judicial setup whereby there was a lot of interference in the past 3 years, if I may say. There were a lot of political cases in courts, and it is as if the judges had some vested interest in the outcomes in those cases. But overall, I would say that our judiciary has been, it has received a green light from the public despite a few episodes. I would also wish to give another example where the judiciary awarded damages to individuals who were tortured. In that case, the Ramakaza case, it was decided that the police should be warned that under customary international law, using universal jurisdiction, torture is an international crime which can be prosecuted. So those are some of the developments we've seen in our law, whereby the judiciary is very responsive to our demands as the people, and our reaction to that has been very positive to it. It has been very positive, and we have seen that the Chief Justice and the President of the Court of Appeal are on our side as the people. But there were 2 episodes recently whereby the former Prime Minister was charged. He was charged with the murder of his former wife, but somehow that case had to be withdrawn from the courts, and there was a backlash. But our courts were clean, because the cases of that is of the prosecution. The cases of the prosecution until the judgment is handed down. So they withdrew the case. People were tempted to say that the judiciary was not working, but that was not the case. There was also a case, I think, of one of the rich men in the country, whereby he was charged of killing one of his employees some time back. And somehow there were no witnesses. It was done in open sight. There were witnesses, but when the case had to be prosecuted, there were no witnesses. I think they only called 2 or 3 witnesses that really did not do much for any conviction. So the court's hands were tied, because the court cannot merely to bring in witnesses and force its hand in the prosecution. So the case was that of the prosecution. So people were actually blaming the judiciary, but I think we should be in a position to say that maybe there has to be reform as far as the prosecution is concerned,
Right.
as far as the police is concerned, yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Mokitimi. That the judiciary process and the proceeding is something I would have loved us to discuss, but because of our time, we would not be able to go much into that. But let me bring in Sehoai here. Now, when we were having the first half of this program, we talked about the political scenery of the country, and one of our guests, Dr. Padi, mentioned that there are over 60 political parties vying for positions, and this seems like a bit of a challenge, don't you think? I mean, looking at how the economy has come and how much growth the country needs, does it look like with all this number of people, the Lesotho people can get the kind of leadership that they need to move the economy forward?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, we have been having a proliferation of political parties, which is quite amazing, actually. It's partly a function of the fact that access to political office is seen as a survival strategy. And it was particularly enabled accidentally and not by design, by the mixed member proportional system, which was brought into Lesotho after the 1998 electoral crisis that we had. I was actually involved in facilitating the transition from the Westminster first past the post model to the current mixed member proportional system, where out of a National Assembly of 120, you have people from MPs from 80 constituencies, as well as the rest from the proportional representation. At that time, the mixed member system was supposed to remedy the fact that Lesotho had problems with the winner takes all, the British constituency-based winner takes all model. And there was justification after the 1998 problems of transitioning to the mixed member proportional system, because that model also enables small parties to emerge, or the threshold for the registration of smaller political parties was not increased, let's say from 500 signatures, which is still the current sort of framework, to let's say 5,000 signatures, which would be like your average size of a constituency plus minus, it is your average size of a constituency. That was one of the key issues under the reforms, as Mr. Mokitimi would agree with me, from TRC, and that was one of the major issues that had to be addressed, which would have cut down that list of 65 parties to a fairly manageable but still excessive list of maybe 30 or 25 or 25, which is still excessive for a country of 2.1 million people. For the reasons that my colleague, Mr. Mokitimi, has indicated, the reforms opportunity was lost, as he has indicated, and you will have contestation in these elections on the 7th of October on the old model of mixed member proportional, 65 parties, but really, for all intents and purposes, I think there are 4 or 5 serious contesting parties, the top 4 or 5, which will either win or be obliged to negotiate coalitions. The second aspect of the reforms process was to manage this post-elections coalition negotiations in a much more systematic manner.
All
and
right.
There was a whole trip taken to New Zealand.
Okay, thank you so much, Sehoai. We really apologize for interjecting, but because of our time, we won't be able to go further than this. Thank you once again for your time, and thank you for the 3 pillars you mentioned, the reform, recovery, and resilience. Really do appreciate it. Thank you also to Mokitimi Tosane.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. It's been a great one, no doubt, having taken a look at the judiciary as well as the governance, and not forgetting to, we've also touched on the fact that indeed, Lesotho is an amazing place to be in, and on Friday will determine a lot as they head for the elections. It will indeed spell out a positivity, and we wouldn't want to say negativity at this juncture. I want to say thank you to all our guests who have joined us for the full 2 hours where we've taken a look at the 56th independence of Lesotho, or better still, you could say the Kingdom of Lesotho, no doubt. It's been a pleasure as well being here. Thanks, Blessings. It's been nice working with you as well.
It has been amazing working with you, and I really have learned a lot about Lesotho, the country I'd love to visit. I will keep saying that until I go there. And, you know, we really are hoping that the elections come Friday, October 7 is free and fair. I mean, we've seen a lot of turbulence when it comes to elections in Africa, but hopefully this is quite different.
No doubt it is. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being here with us. It's been fantastic 2 hours. Remember, we are always here. We're Africa First. We'll always go into all the stories, bringing to you every single thing that you need to know from different parts of the country, east, west, south, you name it. I'm Joe Hanson.
And I'm Blessings Mosugu. Coming up is the news at 12. Thank you.